Hello everyone, it's Dmitry and Surfalytics projects. Together we learn how to be efficient and work with data and how to land the jobs for data analytics roles. Please subscribe, like and share and leave comments. It's really helpful and encourage me to create even more content. We're still in the model 1 and we talk about very basic things. For many people it can be just really simple topic, especially who works in this industry and who has already has the role. Especially if it's engineering role, you probably know all those files because the topic of today's lesson is a different file types that you commonly work as a data analyst, analytics engineer, and data engineer. Of course, it's like machine learning engineers, software engineers, they work with the same files. And I want to tell the most popular files, give you example, and the next time then you will end up, I don't know, file extensions or the file itself. It won't be a surprise for you because we already covered it. No one asks you on the interview about the files, but sometimes then you talk about, for example, integrations of the data, or you extract the data from API or anything. They can what kind of like format? Because could be CSV, TXT file, there could be JSON file, or it could be Parquet file. Right? Those three types of files really important to understand. But also a bunch of different files, for example, configuration files with YAML. This could be git ignore file, .environment files, and so on and so on. So I want to cover all the files that I was able to find and where I ever met in my experience. So let's start. So the very first one is the actual Markdown. So the Markdown files looks like .md, and this is every Git by default, Git repo by default can show you readme.md. So whatever you create the folder, it's very good to have readme. You work on the project, add readme.md and write the very detailed information about what you're actually doing. So if I going to Visual Code and find my readme file for this lesson, you can see this structure, right? Oh, it's long file, but just it's very simple. As soon as you start doing this, I even use it for my daily update to log the work I do. So it's like the word, you have header 1, header 2, header 3, and so on. And this, so what we have next, this is free. So if I have 1, I use back quotes, and it's highlight like variable or piece of the code. If I have many lines of code, I can use triple. And also I can provide what type I have. I don't know. Do we support CSV? Maybe yes. Maybe not. We can say Python, SQL, or anything. That's it about it. And we even able to do the tables. So, and I know the trick. With ChatGPT, you can generate a README for your repo, for your code, for your Python function, for your DBT model very easy. Like for example, this table, it's hard to generate manually, right? But it's quite easy to consume, right? You can read. Table is nice. So I asked ChatGPT to create this table for me. So, and it's safe. Right now, ChatGPT not replacing me, it's complementary to my job. And it serves really well on documentation. So you can instantly increase the quality of the code, the quality of the documentation in the repo using the ChatGPT. But don't forget to read what ChatGPT generated. So the first couple files is simple structure files, it's CSV files, right? It's comma separated files. They have the comma. Sometimes they TSV, it's tab separated files. The challenge, and it's the most popular because they're very simple in terms of operate with data warehouse and tables. So in table, you store data pretty in the same format. You have headers, rows, and columns. So, and there is a TXT files. There is no like pros and cons for them. All of them, they're not the best because sometimes here you can get like some special character that not recognized by your pipeline or your program or BI tool, and maybe yeah, that's why I should be careful about this. So when I have examples, all those files, I have this CSV file, I have TSV file, and I have text file. You can easily hook these right into your BI tool or Python or ETL, whatever you want. So the next set of the files is, and by the way, you see we're reading raw Markdown, right? It's not that complicated if you understand where I look. So the next one I'm talking about semi-structured file. There are two the most popular file is JSON, and I think JSON is very popular. For example, the common use case, if you're getting data from any API or service, it's usually in JSON format. XML less popular. I honestly never work with XML. Just know it's there. It's but the JSON for the data professional is probably like the #1 choice. Then you integrate the data, you can get the JSON. The JSON have the nested structure. This is my example of JSON. All right, it's bigger file. So, and with many ways how you can work with JSON. So it's very convenient way, and for me it's like default the standard file for then you integrate data sources. Of course, the schema here is important, but it could has nested elements, and you can basically using your even many SQL functions. They support reading like from Snowflake, support variant. The Spark really comfortable work with JSON, so you can travel inside the structure. For example, you can store this big JSON is one field in the table, just in one cell, and then you can parse it. This very common pattern in data warehouse, and we'll learn about this in the future. And this XML file, same information in XML. So the next one, I highlight the analytical structure files. There is the Parquet, AVRO, and RC. They three the most popular. And for me, it looks like the Parquet took the ownership here. So for you, you just need to know what's Parquet. So it has really good compression. It's also like tabular format of the files. It supports partitions and very good compression of data. And it's a default format for the data lakes. There is options with AVRO and RC. I know the AVRO file is really good for serializing, and it's often because, for example, when we're talking about the streaming data sets is alternative to the batch. The streaming, it means you constantly get like small pieces of data, and by default, it's usually like JSON format or could be something else. The AVRO is alternative. I even here have the table that's very hard to read, to compare, and very rare, but someone can ask you what's the difference between what, for example, you're using Parquet. Why do you use Parquet if there is AVRO and RC? And they have a different, like you see, the write performance very good, AVRO, and this is what we expect from streaming, right? You should write really fast because events constantly coming. You don't want to waste time on the writing. What's important for you is the read performance, right? For big data lake, big data sets, it's important to have the good and like excellent performance. And the query performance compressions, they all should have compression. The schema evolution is good. Imagine you write files with 5 columns, and next day you start writing 6 columns. Like your pipeline broken, but if you have schema evolutions, it will automatically adjust, and you're not losing any data. So this is just for you to even like you see some use cases. And here integrations, right? They both coming from big data in the time that we have data lakes and Hadoop, but now it's really using popular with our advanced like lakehouse architecture. And Delta Lake, Apache Hudi, Iceberg, they all basically work with similar Parquet files, but they have extra metadata. And I use with Apache Iceberg, for example, it's very popular with Trino. The Snowflake now support Apache Iceberg. Spark supports everything, but default standard of the Spark is Delta. And if, for example, when you start using Databricks and you create your tables, all the data is storing in Delta. But it means it's actually Parquet with some extra metadata. And here you can read more about those files. And I will also, in the course, I will attach more links related to this. So there is another thing also known, I put a separate bucket, is a different kind of log files. So log files is kind of like text file, but they usually have still some structure, because if we have log files, they all will be the same. For example, popular access logs, and it's very close to the like digital marketing. But we usually, when we talk about digital marketing and Google Analytics, we talk about how Google Analytics track events on your website or in front end. But at the back end, where you have the web server, you actually also tracking many other things where it's coming from. And some companies, they're using this data to parse. For example, you can get like the speed, how fast the page was loading, like what's IP source IP address, do you have any kind of threat and attacks, and so on and so on. There is another subset of popular logs is the product logs or custom logs. Imagine you build the SaaS application and you want to introduce new features. So this product manager, you add the new features to the product, and you want to know how many times the customer is using this feature, right? And this is kind of product logs. That's why you can implement this part of the logs, and these logs can be captured, or it could be just JSON, or like many other options. So there is also two other popular things. It's like standard output, standard error, and standard input, but we're not covering. This is what coming, for example, then you run any CLI command. This is what you see. Then for standard error, that something failed, you can see. And for the most tools, for example, if you run Spark cluster, you might see the logs. And basically the logs you see is standard output. When you do something in your command line interface, you can see standard output. So this is just for you know that it's not the files by itself, right? It's more about output of CLI, but those files you can also download it from Spark cluster just to be better. You can see everything what was happening during the work of the cluster, and this is more specific to tailored to the error. There is also sometimes, I personally never use, but some members claim that it's important, DHCP log, right? It also has some kind of information. The next, we're moving to the section of configuration files, and the most popular file is the YAML, and you can find it everywhere. If you have repo, chances that you have YAML file very high. Even like DBT is using YAML. I know Soda is using YAML. Any open source tool from the modern data stack, they're all using YAML file as a configuration. And you can read more here about this. And this is just examples, right? It's very convenient, almost like a text, and you have array, like just like bullet points, right? Like we used to have, we have associated arrays, right? You can like subgroup nested elements. You have nested structures, and this is and it's good to use linters with YAML because it's indentation here is the key. If you miss the indentation, then you're done. So then the dot files, it's another type of the files. Let me first going to here. So let's check what I have for the YAML file as example. This is, for example, pre-commit config, right? And this is important for the linting and pre-commit. So here is the indentation is very important. This is my dot file, dot environment. Very often we're using dot file to use the credentials. For example, here I can specify my environment variables, and then in command line interface until I will run the command, I can refer like the password, for example, to database, or my YAML configuration file can reference to the variable, and this is where I want to store. And I have another, for example, popular file, gitignore dot file. Here I want to say the files that I don't want to add to Git, and dot environment, one of them. Yeah, this example. There are many files. It means usually it's like system file. Even how we set up initially our command line interface, we're using ZSH RC file, or for bash, you have bash profile. Those all like system files, and it means they're not for like public access. Another set of files related, especially the Python framework, and the Python is the most popular for like data analysis and engineering. That's why often in the repo you can find like different files related to the Python environment, because there is the term known as a dependency hell, and it's because like your laptop or your machine have one set of libraries, another and then you're trying to install no new libraries for your task to do, they conflicting, they fail. That's why it's good to create some kind of isolations with the Python environment, and we'll learn about this more. And by the way, the Python I expect to learn not very soon, maybe like model 4. Then we'll start to work with DPT, but that's the goal. Yes, and I want to show some of those files. So for example, I have here the pip file, right? And then it means I can create virtual environment, and for example, there's the packages I want to install. Alternatively, we can use poetry file, like this one. It's TOML file. I know it didn't recognize. Maybe it's typo here. So the idea, the poetry is a different dependency management thing. It's more powerful than pip file, but it's quite popular to use in all kind of environments. Yeah, and here you can find more information about this. You don't need right now do anything about this. You just aware that those files you can meet those files in the future. Or is another file like requirements.txt. This file is usually correlated with pip your virtual environment, and here it has all the libraries you should. And for example, you share your code with your colleague, and they can run the command to install all dependency related to the project you work and environment you work. Yeah, there are some use cases. Then I share about poetry in TOML already. You can read more about this. The pre-commit file, we just talked about this. And by itself, the pre-commit file is must-have file if you have any kind of repo, to avoid like to running the linting, to running unit tests, like as many things as you want, just to make sure that you push really high efficient code, and then you have code if you don't have anything like that. This is just example of this pre-commit. It has those default checkings like hooks, checking the YAML files, the white spaces. There is the Python checks. There is lots of SQL validation, for example, SQL fluff. And this is how we can use and run pre-commit. The Docker, we already talked about the Docker containers and why they're important, but here basically there are two files. So it's Docker file itself with more like instructions to create the image. And this is more related, for example, if you want dbt or Airflow hosted the Docker in your production environment, and this is very common, then you work with open source tools. Then you have the Docker files or Docker Compose, and the Docker Compose is then you have more than one Docker, and you can build like them together. And you can pull images from your custom Docker files or from the Docker registry or your own registry. The make file is another file. It's a kind of, if you have different kind of shell commands, you can create the aliases for them. For example, it's really common to build some like make, setup. So basically this command will set up your environment. You hire a new person, they join the team. To avoid executing manually many different commands, they can run make setup and it will execute a bunch of commands. This example is the make command that and make file. So for example, I probably didn't save the make file yet. I will save it. So this example of the make file, and it's quite simple. It's just alias and your CLI command to run, and also you can provide the variables. You can specify the variables. You can fit the variables. Finally, I want to highlight a couple Python programs. There is not the Python, just the overall what programs you might see relate to the data. Of course, it's the Python programs. There could be shell scripts with the bash commands, and there could be SQL files. And dbt model, for example, SQL files too. So I think that's it. If you just will know each of the files, and here in examples, I even have example of ROC files, right? It doesn't want to open it. I have example of Parquet file also I can open, but AVRO I can open. So AVRO, it's very simple to the JSON file. Yeah, the Parquet, you can use CLI tools for working with Parquet file, and same for AVRO. So the one thing we can add, I can create new file, make file, and then I can go here and copy this to have full things as a make file. I can save it. There is Visual Code Studio allows me to download some package for the make. Okay, why not? Okay, we will save this. We just added the file, and now I can do git add. By the way, you can see that I have this as a like pop up the windows, and it's free thing, and I will teach you how to do this. Git commit. Oh, you see my pre-commit is working. I need again git add, git commit, and git push. That's it. Because I have work in main that you never do in production, probably in branch, so it's all work. It's already merged to the production. So if I mentioned you about this. So it's AWS Code Whisper CLI. This is a really powerful tool that can help you to really empower how you work. And you can do this quite simple if you go here and you can download it and install, make it work. And it's totally free for you. You just need, I think, a free account, and then it can really help you to do the work, right? It can, for everything, it can show me like what the flags I have. If it's Git, I know, for DBT, I don't have anything, but the most common CLI tool. That's it for the data files, and we just own the last lesson about building Excel dashboard, and we're ready to move to the model 2. Thank you, everyone.